Geralt of Rivia, Witcher, the infamous butcher of Blaviken, the White Wolf. But who are we to disturb him in his tub? Let's see how this cake is made. I baked my chocolate sponge cake in an 18 cm spring form so that I got the height I want. The recipe for the sponge cake is up here and will be, as usual, in the description below. This time I'm leaving the slight dome and cut the cake not quite through the middle, as we want to have a depression on the upper side and the cake not too thin there after all. This is not visible in the footage, but I made a ridge on the cake so that when I stuck it back again, it won't be askew. Now with my little bottle with holes in the cap, I'm distributing quite a bit of milk to the cakes. Usually this is made with simple syrup, but I find that personally way too heavy. Syrup or milk, the choice is yours. A tad of white chocolate ganache on my cake platter and on with the lower layer of the cake. I add 2 big scoops of white chocolate ganache. The recipe for that is in the description below as well. You can of course use buttercream too, or like Italian meringue or anything like that, but I felt like having something more chocolatey. Now some chocolate chips on that and another few scoops to close them off. See that ridge I made here? Now I can place a second layer without a problem onto the other. As we want a neat cake, I'm filling up the gap between the layers and crumb coat the cake. As you notice, I'm not crumb coating it completely, as some of the upper layer will be removed. I just plaster on some ganache on the edge and let the cake set for a bit in the fridge. Once it has rested a bit, I take a sharp serrated knife and cut around the cake so that I get a more or less even ridge on the side. I actually wanted to make it more narrow, but I didn't want to risk the cake breaking while I move it around. As you see here, I'm using a small spoon to scoop out the layer of cake, and because I think it's not quite deep enough, I cut out a bit more. I try to keep it as even as possible. We can't leave that so exposed, can we? I melt a bit of white chocolate and color it blue for the water of the tub. You could directly use fondant, but I think an uneven coat or two of chocolate would make the surface look more interesting. I pour on quite a bit and spread it so that the whole cake is closed off. No humidity for this cake. But as I wasn't really able to cover all the crumbs of the cake in one go, I let the chocolate set in the fridge for a bit and applied a second, thinner layer of chocolate to clean it up. When I was happy with that, I measured how long I needed to roll out the brown fondant for the tub. You see, I'm learning from my mistakes. I roll out the fondant on some starch and again measure it so that I have it a bit longer and broader than I actually need. Then I carefully drape it around the cake. I smooth it on and cut the most visible corner as neat as possible. I, of course, fail the first time around and need to go over it again. When I'm happy with that, I'm cutting off the excess at the top, and there the chocolate is really helpful. As I want a clean, crisp corner, I push that in quite a bit, but without tearing the fondant. I cut off the excess here as well, but leave a bit on the edge so that I have no problems when I am transferring the cake onto another surface. Again, my good friend the measuring tape. I wanted even planks on the tub. My inspiration for the cake was the Nendoroid figurine, so go figure. First I marked the places and used a ruler to get some straight lines, which I reinforced with my weird tool thingy. The Nendoroid, or however it's pronounced, doesn't have this much detail, but as this is a wooden tub, I wanted to texture it a bit. I draw on some random lines, trying not to overlay them. With a thinner tool, a toothpick would have done the trick too, I go over some of the empty spaces so that it wouldn't look too empty. I really like how it turned out. It is subtle yet visible. For the upper finish of the top, I found that the easiest way would be to roll out some fondant in a round shape and place it on. I didn't want to have any unnecessary seams after all. I cut it off where I want to have the edge and the excess on top. I cleaned up the unclean corners and pushed it down here and there. I know, now one part of the top is thicker than the other sides, but I will use that part for Geralt himself so it won't be as visible. Speaking of my dear Witcher, as he is going to have chibi proportions, he'll have a fairly big head. To keep that secure, I used a few wooden skewers and take some aluminum foil to shape the head. Fondant alone would be too heavy and wouldn't hold in its place as tight as I want it to be. The skewers are way too long, so I'll be cutting them shorter to about the height of the cake. When I'm happy with the size, I take some very light skin tone fondant that I mixed beforehand and just make a layer to cover the whole foil. When that's done, I put on a clean rolled out layer of the same color. You know, to have it even and smooth. Then gradually, I just use my hands to determine where the eyes will go and pinch on his cute little nose here. While smoothing his face to the shape I want, I pinch off the excess of the fondant on the back of his head off as well. It doesn't look neat there, but he'll get enough hair so that it won't be a problem to cover up. When I'm happy with the shape of the face, I make the eyes. First, I push the approximate eye sockets with my blue tool here, and then with a tiny bit of water, I add a bit of white that get pushed to the shape I want here. I cut off any parts that I don't like. Then, with even tinier bits of yellow fondant, I smooth on his pupils, which is easy enough. To complete his cat eyes, I form a tiny snail of black fondant and carefully push it into that shape. With those eyes, he looks just way too surprised, so I rolled out some black fondant into a thin line and make an eyelid out of it. I really like how the right eye just gets done so easily, but I have to fiddle around with the left eye for so long. Ugh, I hate that! As a final touch, I make some small indentation beneath the eyes to make him look more gruff. Before I can add the eyebrows, he needs some scars. Mixing this color was a pain, I tell you. To be honest, I don't even remember anymore what was in there. On the footage, it looks like a faint purple, but trust me, it's not quite that. Anyways, I just smooth them on so that it gets completely even with the skin. I wouldn't want his scars to stand out too much. Then I move on to the eyebrows. I rolled out a thin layer of light gray that I mixed myself and cut it approximately to the shape I needed, but once on the face I just realized that it doesn't look quite right and cut off more here and there. Same goes for the other eyebrow as well. In the books he really doesn't like his beard, but I must say it suits him quite well in the game. So here I'm wetting his lower face a bit and put a thicker layer than his eyebrows on his face. I'm careful not to push too hard as I need to cut off some part in the middle for his mouth. But first I make two roundish lines to define his cheeks a bit better. After that I remove the middle part and smooth the corners. For a gruff Witcher, there must be a gruff mouth. I just put a thin snake of fondant and push it carefully into its rightful place. When that's done, I cut around the face to clean off the beard. Before I add the hair, I just made a thick round piece and separated it into two separate pieces, which became the ears. I just smoothed them on directly where the beard ends. For the hair, I rolled out a thicker layer of fondant and laid it onto the back of his hat and smoothed it on. Then he gets a haircut to have the hair nice and even. And at this point I wish I had some embroidery scissors handy. The thick ones made the hair look quite clumsy and I just ended up cutting it randomly. I pulled out the pieces that were meant to be removed and pinched and squeezed the ends so that the hair looks more like hair, you know? Then I started to texture it a bit with my blue tool, but as I didn't like how flat the back looked, I got 2 blobs of fondant and tucked them under the hairline to make it stand off a bit more. Without his hair on the top, he really looks old. I won't leave him like that, don't worry. I cut the front part to a point and carefully put it onto his hat. When that is securely in its place, I cut off the excess and start to texture it. I could have worked with snakes of clay and made it look even more 3D, but I didn't trust myself that day and the fondant was soft enough to yield to my rubber tool here. It turned out better than I thought, to be honest. I'm careful that I keep the lines I'm making here in the right direction for the ponytail in the back. I wouldn't want it to look awkward. I add a few thinner lines to make it more detailed and get a small piece for the pony. To get the strands of hair, I just cut through it 3 times, round it off, and kind of lay them onto each other. I was surprised that this worked out on my first try. I just pushed and smoothed that onto the back of his hat and a few last touch-ups and his head is done. On my first try, I left quite a long neck for him, but that wouldn't work out. So I removed that and placed him on the thicker end of the tub. In accordance to the chibi proportions, I put a rectangle for his torso that I smooth on and use my rubber tool to mark just about where his chest and abs are. I don't want them to stand out too much, so I run my finger over it to soften the edges a bit. My first try of the arms were quite awkward position-wise. I was thinking too much of the Nendoroid version, which didn't make any sense, I know. But I liked the length of it, so here's my second try. First, I just made the shoulder a tad wet so that the fondant would stick quite right. Then I just smoothed them on carefully. This pose just made much more sense and it felt more comfy overall. One thing that I probably will never be able to sculpt or draw are feet. I play around with them quite a bit, but they never seem quite right. I tried to make the depression between the toes and the rest of the sole, but it wasn't quite right either. It looked better than before, so that's a plus. To secure the feet to their place, I just added a tiny bit more of the blue chocolate and clean up the edges of the torso as well. He's in the water after all. I accidentally got some chocolate drippings here and there, but I didn't bother cleaning up. A bit of mess doesn't hurt here because, you know, it's water. I'm so happy how it turned out. The only thing I need here to be more careful about was the cutting of the upper chocolate layer. I heated up my knife a bit and that worked out quite well. If you haven't guessed already, I'm a sucker for the Witcher franchise, be it the books or the games. Which book or games or movies do you like? And would you like to see them as a cake or a dessert? Let us know in the comments below. A lot of work went into this cake, so please drop a like to support us and subscribe if you don't want to miss our weekly videos. Thank you for watching and see you next week!